Endless Hustle is presented by Eat Clean Bro, a convenient solution to bring you the highest quality chef-prepared meals delivered right to your door. Eat Clean Bro is the contract-free solution for your meal prep needs. Made with all-natural ingredients and next-day delivery, every meal feels like you have someone cooking for you right at home. All right, it is a fun day on the Endless Hustle as I'm joined by the man making lacrosse cool for America, the man who's taken it mainstream, Paul Rabil. Dude, congratulations, first of all, the PLL. When I first heard about this, I'm like, no chance lacrosse survives. Meanwhile, you're on NBC, you're at Gillette Stadium. It's like a sport, like a major sport now. Dude, congrats. This is awesome.
I appreciate you. Appreciate you having me. And now that we're 3 years in, I often think back to Mike and I running around with a 8-page deck to investors, so certain that it was going to happen. But in hindsight, it's like, how the hell did it happen? Because I would have been like you, like the magnitude of doing everything from signing all the players to getting venue agreements done, coming up with team names, legal, marketing. At one point we were like, oh, we've got to hire refs. How do we go about doing that? And they have like their own association. And so you're signing the task list was endless. I would never do it again, but here we are.
You know, it's incredible because, and you just checked off some of those boxes, but I was thinking to myself, look at the sports that have had these spin-off leagues, like the XFL. I mean, those things don't survive. Meanwhile, you were able to build this into a profitable and successful league. You get a major network involved. You've got major sponsors. It's all great to see it as a success story today. But was there a moment for you where you like, this shit is not going to happen? It's never going to just take off.
Yeah, like every day still. There's so much work to be done. I think that, well, first of all, there's a lot of emerging leagues. I think Mike and I talk about this a lot. If the MLL was working, we would have bought a team or like raised capital to go invest in the league. It wasn't working. And I think when you look at offshoot leagues that are kind of feature businesses of the main thing, like the NFL works, PGA Tour works, as we saw with the Super League, the threat of the Super League in global soccer, like EPL works, La Liga works, Bundesliga works. Like, what the fuck are we doing? You've got to have, for your thing to even stand a chance, you've got to have the best players in the world, and you've got to be the definitive property. Otherwise, you're just fighting for scraps. And so, like, we have enough of a hill to climb to compete with the legacy leagues. If we didn't have all the best lacrosse players in the world, we wouldn't even know what the hell to sell. So I think that's the big difference between what we were building at the PLL. And then on the front of, continuing to chip away is a lot of people, even in our industry, thought that we were just trying to build a better mousetrap than the MLL, like MLL 2.0. And when we had 20 employees and then 70 employees, people were like, damn, you guys are here. And like Mike, who's sitting across the hall from me, is our CEO and my co-founder, older brother. He's like building the infrastructure to have 500 employees. And like, that's how we're looking at this. Like, we want to do to the MMA what UFC did to lacrosse. And we want to build the next major legacy sport in North America and the next $1 billion plus category. And we know how to get there. It just takes a lot of resilience and insane amount of effort and a lot of time.
It's funny you mentioned that because I had Dana White on the show 2 weeks ago, and we talked all about the beginning of the UFC. And he was kind of getting laughed out of rooms himself. Obviously, now the UFC is the UFC, but he always had this stern belief that this was going to become what it ended up becoming. Is that something that you have as well? Is that this prenatal thing where you're like, listen, this will not fail. I will not allow it to fail?
Well, I think you have to have that fire deep down. And then at a surface level, there's an everyday problem that gets you questioning the path. And then you also have to be, agile to change the course from time to time. But in our view, we don't see why we can't get there. We know why it hasn't gotten there. And we also know, I think one of the biggest challenges is actually at a psychological level, where people just kind of look at lacrosse and they're like, this is like polo, or like this bougie, like mid-Atlantic white preparatory school sport. If that was its roots, then we would have to try to build the next F1. But the roots of lacrosse are Native American. Like, the game is the longest or the most historic game in North America. It's been played for thousands of years. It was created by the Haudenosaunee, which is the Iroquois Confederacy, and the best player in the world right now still lives on the Onondaga Nation with his family. His name's Lyle Thompson. So descendants of the game are still playing the game, which is a unique story to North America and North American history. And it actually isn't what people thought or think it is for the last 15 to 20 years. And we're trying to change that. So there's definitely obstacles, just like there were for the UFC. The example of the UFCs, because I remember watching them grow, was like, oh, this is the kill sport. And they had a really hard time driving sponsorship dollars, which is a big revenue piece of the success of any league. And brands had a difficult time understanding if it was safe to play. And then they got over it. And then brands had to get in line because they didn't have inventory available.
I want to talk to you about the personal brand you're building yourself, because in a way you're kind of the face of the league, but you're also the face of you. Like, you're on Seth Meyers, you're getting these talk shows now. And I'm like, a lacrosse guy getting on a late night talk show is not the usual path.
No.
So how much of your own personal branding did you realize had to become important to also elevate the exposure for the league?
Well, in large part, it's why we started the league, is that, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have. Starting a league and getting distribution on a network like NBC was impossible unless you went to them with a $10 million check and they were just going to gut it out for you. And that's effectively called a time buy, which historically doesn't work. So we were never going to do that. And our investors wouldn't have done that. So the greater shift was social media over the last decade and a half. And what that's led to is giving the power to the athletes and driving attention through new mediums that were free to play. Previously, the only mediums available were linear, television, print, radio, and you had to either play or you had to have viewership historicals. So pro lacrosse had 0 ratings historically. So going to a network with like lack of MLL ratings wasn't going to get us a deal. So we created this big presentation around my social following, some of the top lacrosse players' social followings, and the conversion funnel of awareness generation around professional lacrosse to drive viewership to television in a world where there's a lot of cable cutting and consumers heading to streaming. So it was actually like the perfect time from our perspective to get in there. But to your question, we leveraged a lot of kind of new age media and audiences that are attracted to following athletes.
You're pretty much like, I'm an influencer, guys. Get this league on the air.
Maybe that would have worked. Yeah, I don't know. I think I might have gotten booed out of the room. But yeah, it's definitely hard to pitch yourself though, which is why I have a great team. It's like, hey, don't you want to align with me? Is not something you want to do.
And then you're like, little old me, really?
Yeah. You're like, it's like if you start getting baited into third person dialogue, and you're like, no, I'm not having this. Stepping out of the room to save my own embarrassment.
I remember when I saw your recent video, you shooting jump shots. So I played high school and college basketball, and obviously you were promoting Steph Curry coming on your podcast. Mm-hmm. You actually had pretty decent form, by the way, but I need to know, those were not first takes. So how many takes did you have to take to get those shots in?
So I grew up playing hoops, and I had this argument with my production team that's on the other side of the office. And they were like, okay, we basically got to carve out 2 hours to do what Paul wanted to do. And the previous shoot that I had done was with Tony Hawk, and I can't ride a fucking skateboard. And so we basically staged that. So they went from in fairness to them, they went from okay, part of our promotion is Paul doing the discipline of the talent that we're bringing on the podcast. And so Steph came up and was like, guys, trust me, I can play hoops. I grew up playing hoops. And I know how to shoot a jump shot. So maybe not first take. Some of those were, The one from half court, I think, took me 3 to 5 shots. You know, you played college hoops. You kind of like the degree of difficult. If you have it in you, if you have range, it's kind of like a free throw. It's totally different when you're in a game and you have defenders on you. And I'm not going to say like I'm locked in and I can shoot, 7 or 8 for 10 from the 3-point line, but it's definitely not a dude perfect shoot where I was like taking 20 attempts to hit a 3.
I mean, listen, logo shots are not easy. So when I saw that, I was like, first of all, there's no way that's a one taker, but still impressive, man.
You can judge by my sweat, which I didn't have much sweat, right? Like that's the thing that I always tell, because I did a shoot with Dude Perfect like 5 or 6 years ago, and it was one of the moments for me when you asked about social media that people started recognizing me, and people still today on TikTok, they'll be like, "Aren't you the dude from Dude Perfect?" I'm like, "Fuck." That's how they recognize me. But like you can tell in the Dude Perfect shoots how many attempts based on the amount of sweat the person has. So anyway, challenging the Steph Curry Instagram post, I wasn't sweating.
The people you had on your podcast, I mean, I've had Tony on the show as well, but I've never had Steph on. I've never even actually spoken to Steph, but you had Cuban on. You've had great names. Who was the one or two that really blew you away in terms of presence, mentality, just whatever that it factor is, they had that it factor?
This season was a lot of fun because I think most of the guests that we brought on, I would consider, top class, world class, in some cases A-listers. So there was something new, and obviously to get to the level of Lindsey Vonn or Sue Bird or Abby Wambach or Steph Curry, it just takes this ridiculous level of work ethic and commitment and paranoia and all of like the double-edged sword attributes that make you great, but also kill you. And I think that if I look at two guests that I had that one I knew would be unbelievable because I think he's one of the best orators in the world is Cory Booker. And we talked about the College Athletes Bill of Rights, which he's championing. And we just saw the Supreme Court rule in favor of the athletes just this week around receiving academic compensation for academic related products. So there's like a tip of the iceberg against the NCAA in favor of the athletes in moving past amateurism. So Cory and I talked a lot about that, but his ability to storytell is unbelievable. And then the other one was actually the dark horse, and that's Tom Rothman. So clearly, now, Arthur, that like I care a lot about business intricacies and storytelling. He was fucking incredible talking about filmmaking, actors versus athletes, stories of working with James Cameron on the Titanic and like his time with Steven Spielberg and like the nuances of managing a $250 million film that's dependent on a Friday night balloon or what do they call it? Parachute success or not. It was like pretty dynamic.
He is one of the most anti-Hollywood types you will ever meet. I've talked to him on red carpets, and I'm always like, this dude's actually running a studio. He like shows up in like khakis, a polo shirt. You would be like, is this one of the ushers? Meanwhile, it's like he paid for this, $50 million movie. But you're right. He's that dude next door, and he's so charismatic. And you just get lost in the stories. It's like a book as you're listening to him, an audio book. It's incredible.
Yeah. I kind of felt like I was sitting by a campfire listening to a Hollywood executive tell me about, back in my day, this was how it was done. And the amazing thing about Tom is perennial. So now he's still, running one of the 5 major media conglomerates that doesn't have a streamer. And so he's challenged, but he's figuring it out in a modern world. And he talked a little bit about that through the comparison of what's happening with streaming to what happened to the movie business when Blockbuster first started, which I thought was an interesting take.
I want to talk to you about nutrition and fitness because having never played lacrosse, I have no idea and had no idea until I tried playing for the first time, the conditioning you guys have to have and the brutality in terms of just the physicality of it all. What's your nutrition and fitness regimen? How do you stay in shape, especially as you're getting older?
Well, it's hard. And I think that's exactly right. Especially as you get older, you have to change. And one of honestly the benefits of the podcast that I have is like getting to bed year of athletes who have played with a lot of longevity. So Sue Bird and I talked about this in our show. And she literally hardly practices now. And we've talked offline a bunch. And she's like, you know, you've done the 10,000 plus reps on each of the disciplines within lacrosse. What got you there was this like maniacal mindset that you need to keep practicing to be great. She was like, you need to let that go now. And what's most important is that your body just feels good, because it's hard to feel good when you're older. Another thing that Steve Nash told me once was, when we're younger, we can do everything within our nutritional rest, recovery, sleep standpoint to be ready for a workout in a game. So I'll get my 8 hours of sleep. I'll eat well the night before, eat well in the morning. I show up to the gym and I'm ready. So the thing about playing when you're in your late 30s, and he played until he was like 40 or 41, is you can do all of that. And then for whatever fucking reason, you show up and you're feeling like shit. And he was like, and sometimes I don't get much sleep at all. And I get to the gym and I just have this dopamine release. I'm ready to go. So his advice to me was, when you're feeling good, extend your workout, get everything you can out of it. And if you show up and you're disappointed because you're feeling like shit, he was like, shorten the workout, just stretch and get out of there. So it's basically like a totally different mindset. I do focus on nutrition. I was vegan for 2 years to get rid of, I didn't get rid of it, but alleviate a lot of my sciatica pain that I was getting from two protruding discs, my L4, L5, L5S1. And then that set me on a trend towards now plant-based diet. Things like hydration, you pay more attention to when you're older. When you're younger, you know, you can eat a McDonald's Happy Meal and be, go out the night before and not get hydrated and feel fine. When you're older, you feel like a dry plant after a game. No matter how well you eat and how much you hydrate, you're just like, hi guys, this is insane. So we feel it more when we're older, which I think why a lot of older athletes pay attention more to their diet than when you're younger.
It's the truth. I'm 43 and I work out every day. And I used to be able to tear through anything and I would have a six pack. Now it's like, if I take on an extra calorie, there's a gut and you're just like, what the fuck? When did this happen?
Yeah. I mean, and so the lesson to kids that I'd say is, look, if you want to be a professional athlete, if you want to be a great athlete, then you should recognize that your body is a race car, and don't put unleaded fuel in the fucking tank. Put premium fuel in the tank, because when you're driving, you have a new car and you put unleaded or regular, you're not going to notice it until the car gets a little bit older. And then all of a sudden, like, the engine goes and the mechanic's like, oh yeah, what kind of fuel have you been putting in this thing? This is a race car. So you got to have the foresight, because you're not going to notice it when you're younger. Your body won't feel it, but it will catch up to you.
So I also host a series for the NHL, and obviously lacrosse and the NHL have very distinct similarities. How are you as a hockey player? Can you get on the ice? Do you have any skills? Could we see Paul Rabil in the NHL one day?
Well, there's a reason why I didn't do any hockey demos when I had John Tavares as my guest on the podcast. So, I mean, I can skate. I used to play street hockey. I never played competitive ice hockey. And then from playing indoor lacrosse for a long time and having a lot of Canadian teammates, we would occasionally take out hockey sticks. So I could probably figure it out, but zero expectations for me to hold any weight in a adult beer league.
How good are those athletes? How good are NHL players? Obviously coming from an elite athlete yourself.
They're tremendous athletes. I think what you get when you look at lacrosse players and hockey players, and to a degree, even like golf or race car drivers, is there's so much more to athleticism than what we see in an NFL combine. There's fluidity, there's hand-eye coordination, there's spatial awareness. I mean, one of the things that I think makes Lionel Messi so great that doesn't get discussed is his spatial awareness and his balance and center of gravity. Like, he sees the plays happening before anyone else, and that makes him deceptive. It makes him so talented. It's like what Wayne Gretzky is famously known for, is seeing where the puck was going before anyone else could. And I think you get that in a lot of stickball sports. Baseball is similar. So athletes come in all different shapes and sizes. Lacrosse is unique from my perspective because we do peel off a lot of athletic traits from the main sports. So the endurance of soccer, the hand-eye coordination of baseball, the agility kind of two-man game of hoops, and the contact of football.
Having Tavares on the show, do you find yourself becoming a fan of the Islanders because they've made a deep run in the Stanley Cup playoffs? Do you find yourself by association cheering for them?
Well, I've actually found myself, I mean, that was a hard one because he's captain of the Leafs and had a tough breakup with the Islanders, but was drafted by the Islanders and deeply cares about the Islanders, but such a good dude. And when he had that accident in the opening round against Montreal, it was like, damn, man, because you build a relationship with someone, they have a lot of pressure on their shoulders at that stage in the NHL, and then to have that unfortunate collision. But it's good to see he's doing well. And I would call myself a fluid fan. I grew up in Washington, so I support the Washington football team, but I have a close relationship with Bill Belichick, so I'm kind of a Patriots guy. And in the end, it's like when you're in the business of sport, which you are too, we live and breathe this business. So it becomes, it's our livelihood, but it also becomes less serious in a way from the fans' perspective, because we just like see how the sausage is made. And we're like, So I don't really watch sports when I go home. I watch movies, and I cheer for a lot of people.
I want to talk to you about Barstool, because I know Erica is obviously on the board with PLL, and their platform is unlike any other platform. Their fan base, I would put their fan base above anybody at this moment. What type of push have they given to you in terms of being able to create general exposure and buzz around the league?
Well, Erica's, I think, one of the best executives in media. AOL, Yahoo, Barstool, WWE. So she has this range of experience, but she's very attuned to having a robust catalog of talent that covers a range of properties. So they're huge on TikTok, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. They've cut linear deals. They have a running daily show with satellite radio. So they're everywhere. And what they're really good at understanding is the unique audiences matched with their talent stable, matched with the delivery and execution of content. And it's super challenging. So she's been really helpful from an advisory standpoint. And I think where we fit in with an organization like that is that range of talent, and in some cases like comedic tie to that, what we had talked about to start the show, what people think lacrosse represents, and being able to roll with those punches and get the back end exposure, and also benefit from the seriousness of what inevitably we turn into when we get a casual fan to watch us for the first time, is what we've been able to pull off.
You'd mentioned Steve Nash earlier, and he actually, alongside Gretzky and some others, bought in the NLL, and are buying a franchise there, or investing in a franchise. And even though it's not your league, I feel like it legitimizes the sport in a way. As soon as you start seeing celebrities get involved, the MLS is a great example. Harden jumping in, Drew Carey, now like McConaughey's with Austin. Everybody's thrown money in the MLS. When you start seeing that happening in your sport, does that celebritization of the sport help? And if it does, do you start getting contacted by celebrities? And I'm sure you can't name who, but are there off-channel conversations about, hey, buy into the PLL?
For sure. And I think, whether it's our understanding our audience, our players, and even celebrities, I try to segment each of those out. So a celebrity comes in different forms. There's the A-list athlete celebrities, so who we see at the ESPYs, and then there are A-listers on the entertainment side. So, for example, with MLS, you mentioned Matthew McConaughey and Will Ferrell. They have, from my perspective, understanding analytics tie, they have a much different appeal and greater reach than even the biggest athletes in the world. So athletes investing in other athletes or other sports is validating and important and elevating. But when you get crossover appeal, that is especially beneficial, because now all of a sudden you're bringing an entertainment audience through Will Ferrell over to LAFC, which is traditionally just going after a sports fan. So the net of it is understanding where we are now, the exposure we get from bringing on athletes or entertainers who are investing in their audience size. And the last piece is, what are you then going to do with it? Which takes it to our earlier conversation around influencers, right? You can have someone who is now all of a sudden the chief brand officer of PepsiCo, and it's an entertainer, and there's a press release and an announcement, and you're going, wow, that's interesting. Will.i.am is working with IBM. But if that's the only announcement, it goes away pretty quickly. So I see a lot of brands make that mistake is, okay, now that you bring someone on to work with, how consistently are you working with them? And an example of us doing that well, I think, is Method Man. The authenticity of Meth growing up playing lacrosse in Long Island. He cares deeply about the sport. He is a stockholder in the PLL. We did a merchandise collab with Meth and the Woo logo. And we're doing more stuff with him during games, and a lot of with our PLL assist partners like Harlem Lacrosse, Oakland Lacrosse, Charm City Youth Lacrosse.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I've seen it firsthand with the NHL. It's how do we bring in the audiences who have not been watching us for the last 40 years?
Yep, exactly.
And especially with the startup league and an emerging league, it's got to be even more crucial, because you're essentially forming the audience's first impression of what you're building.
Yeah, I mean, we look at our audience as our lacrosse fans. There's 10 million of them. And then if you look at casual fans in the US, there's 100 million of those. So we've got to understand, when we're appealing to the casual sports fans, it's got to be really digestible version of our product. So the biggest highlights, and it's got to be understandable. So ball in net. And then we've got to promote our stars. And when we're talking to the 10 million lacrosse fans, then we roll our sleeves up and we talk about analytics and stats and odds, and the players that are on the second line midfield that had a contribution of 2.5 points on average, because then they're like, oh, this is great. It's like fantasy football. And so understanding who we're speaking to as a method to growing is super important.
Yeah, you'd mentioned fantasy football, and I know betting has entered your sport, and betting has taken over the world, period. How do you kind of contain the betting part of it without, obviously we always think of the Pete Rose complex.
Yeah.
How do you not let it corrupt the sport?
Well, I think that's the challenge that's akin to the early stages of Airbnb, call it, where investors were a little bit weary of this like offshoot chance of someone renting your place and committing a crime in your place. And it turns out like 20 years later, it's never happened. And with sports betting in America, different than on the Eastern hemisphere of the world, we're always concerned about like the Pete Rose example or integrity services. So what we've actually done is, and this is mandated for any properties, you got to have an integrity services partner. And so Genius Sports is one, the other is Sport Radar. We work with Genius, and they basically come in and build out the whole platform. And then they have heat mapping of bets. They're constantly tracking the trends, and they can identify any type of foul play. And then you create like really rigid rules. So no one that works for the PLL and no players obviously can't bet on the PLL, but we actually can't bet on anything when we're in season. And that's the case at the NFL, it's the case with the NBA. And that's a pretty clear rule. That's a one strike rule.
Fascinating. All right. Before I let you go, one of the reasons that I started this show was to talk to successful people like you, Paul, about the mindset that they need in order to achieve success. So my question to you, Paul Rabil, how do you continue to elevate both on and off the field?
I think in the world that we're in today, especially with one-hit wonders, and for the same reasons that I talked about the ability to start a league now versus 10 years ago, is that you can in theory become an overnight success. And that wasn't the case 20 years ago, pre-internet certainly. However, that is a fleeting case study. No matter what, whether you're a 20-year-old and you get a pop on social and you get opportunities you never dreamed of, or if you were 20 years old and you grinded your ass off until you were 40 to get that opportunity, in both of those cases, to actually feel that success and fulfillment, you've got to work. You've got to be great. Being great is your baseline, and you've got to work, and you've got to be lucky. And that's basically the algorithm, and it doesn't get easy, and it won't get easier. So you've got to understand like what matters to you, how you define success, and then taking an objective look on then, okay, if that's what the known is, am I suited for that? Am I capable of taking that on?
What's the end game for you at this point? Go sell the league for $10 billion. I'll get the cliche answer, which is, oh, we want it to be entertaining and fan. I get it. But really, the end game has got to be like, let me go be a billionaire.
Yeah. And I mean, the easy way to say it is, we have shareholders, and our players are shareholders too, and we want to drive a return to them. We're not in the business of like getting their money back or driving a 3 or 5x return. So like my job as a co-founder of this business is to drive as big of a return to our investors who trusted us, who gave us capital to go build this league. And then I think the trickle down is the impact that the sport will have on the next generation, is we're going to see the 12-year-olds now sign $1 million deals when they're ready out of school.
Dude, this was awesome. Congrats on everything you're doing. You're hustling your ass off, man. And like I said, when I heard about the PLL, I'm like, no chance. And to see how far you guys have come, and now Hogan joined the league, and that's giving you publicity. I mean, it's awesome. And now you got Kraft throwing money in. I mean, you're doing great things, man. Congratulations.
Appreciate you, Arthur. And we got to get you to a game now.
I'm in, man.
And maybe you and I can go play hoops.
I haven't touched it back. I put up a video like, I don't know, like 3 months ago. I hadn't touched a basketball in 10 years. I actually hit a few foul shots, and I was just like, fuck, I forgot how hard this is. But the form was still great.
Take it. Yeah. That's right.
This was a pleasure, man. I know you got to go present. Thanks for just the great stuff, dude.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Paul. Talk to you.